Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the August 2022 Council Agenda Briefing. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and their elders past and present. I would like to advise everyone that the audio of this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube. I request everyone to turn off mobile phones and remind you that audio recording of the meeting proceedings and photography within the chamber is prohibited unless prior approval has been granted. Councillors and city officers are reminded to disclose any declarations of financial interests and interests affecting impartiality and are requested to activate their microphones when addressing the meeting. So, with that, welcome. Item 1 is the declaration of opening, and I declare this meeting open at 1 minute past 6 p.m. Items for council. Agenda items 2, 3, 6, 7, 8.1, 8.2, 9, 11, 13 and 14 will be dealt with at the ordinary council meeting to be held 23 August 2022. Item 4 is attendances. Item 4.1 is apologies, of which there are nil this evening. And item 4.2 is approved leaves of absence, of which there is nil this evening. Item 5 is declarations of interest. I'm declaring an impartiality interest in relation to item 10.5.1, as my wife serves on the committee of the Manning Community Toy Library and my family are members of the Manning Community Toy Library. Councillor Stephen Russell has declared an impartiality interest in item 10.5.3 as I have an association with the applicant. This association is that my son is a junior member of the club. As a consequence, there may be a perception that my impartiality on the matter may be affected. I declare that I will consider this matter on its merits and vote accordingly. I've also declared, and it's Mayor Greg Milner, has declared an impartiality interest in item 15.1.1 as my wife and I have attended the annual South Perth Hospital Christmas dinner in previous years and have received a meal at these functions. Councillors, does anyone else have any interest that they would like to declare this evening? Councillor Cridland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I declare an impartiality interest in respect of 10.1.1 and 10.1.2 in that my family are members of the South Perth Lawn Tennis Club and my children and myself have played tennis for that club. I'll consider these matters on their merits and vote accordingly.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Councillors, any other interests to be declared this evening? No. Okay. That brings us to item 8, which is presentations. Item 8.3 is deputations. And this evening, we have 2 speakers who will have up to 10 minutes in total to address council. So with that, I'd like to invite Mr. Sam Middlemas and Mr. Robert Kelly of Perth, who are speaking against the officer's recommendation at item 10.3.1. Welcome, gentlemen.
Yep, thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and councillors, and I thank you for giving us the opportunity to present at this briefing session on the proposed digital sign on the building on the corner of Canning Highway and South Street in Como. Just a little about ourselves. I'm the owner of the building, having purchased it about 8 years ago from the original owner. And I formed a partnership with Rob Kelly, who some of you may already know, who's also a resident of South Perth and runs Sign On, which is a company that builds and maintains these digital signs. First of all, an apology for last briefing. Our drawings were a little bit, needed a bit of work, and I think a couple of the councillors pointed out that they looked a bit weird. And it looked like the sign was on top of the roof, whereas the sign, as you can see on the presentation there, is actually sits on the front fascia of the building. And I apologise, we thought it easier to withdraw from the meeting the following week and re-present this time around. So at the last briefing, our planner from Planning Solutions ran through a PowerPoint presentation with you, and I've really just updated that, but I'll if it's okay, I'll just refer to it and talk a little bit off the cuff. So as I advised, I purchased the building in 2014, and we struggled to get tenants for the front of the building on Canning Highway. And the tenancies remained empty for almost 4 years before we were able to attract a clothes store that's now in the front merry-go-round. And, you know, it was heartbreaking for me to drive past the tenancy most days and see it empty and a bit sad. Today we've finally fully leased on the ground floor, and it's brought the building back to a bit of life. But, you know, we had to do quite a bit of work refurbishing the inside, and the tenants are probably paying the lowest rent in Perth, I think. So when Rob came to me with the idea of the digital sign, it came with the possibility to increase the income from the building, which would allow us to do some upgrades for the tenants and to the outside of the building and the amenity. And what you're seeing there is the sign with a new front what is it? Aluminium cladding, the fireproof aluminium cladding, and we've tried to keep that in keeping with the Como Hotel that's just been refurbished directly across the road. So, as you'd be aware, the building is on Canning Highway, and it's located in the Canning Highway Road Reserve, which is a reserve that was implemented early 1960s for Canning Highway to allow for widening for buses or train. So there's 17 metres of the road on our side that's part of the widening, which is basically all the front shops, the shops fronting Canning Highway. So at any time, Main Roads can come along and say, thanks very much, we'll have that. And as a consequence, it's a bit sad, the whole of the south of Canning Highway, really from the causeway through to the freeway is, I mean, it's pretty much, owners can't really do anything to the buildings because when Main Roads decides to take them off us, I think we get land value only, or there's a bit of a formula, but so they're going to remain in that state until the road gets widened. As I said, I've had it for 8 years. The road reserve's been in place for in excess of 50 years now, and who knows when and if it will ever get widened. But that's the issue, and we've been to Main Roads, and Main Roads have reviewed the sign, and we've done a safety report for Main Roads, and Main Roads have actually approved the sign subject to some fairly acceptable conditions. And they've also told us that it's not planned to widen for the next 4 years, or it's not in their planning. Having said that, a change of government could change that. But so that's why we've taken the opportunity. The sign might only be there for 4 years if they decide to knock the building. Rob and I are hopeful that it'll be there for 10 years or 20 years or however long until we lose the site. So and part of the proposal is to actually upgrade the building with the cladding, although the council planners have say that it's just a sign, so they've assessed it as just a sign and not looking at the facade and how we're going to change it. But we've given an undertaking that we'll do that cladding. So we went to Planning Solutions and we asked them to put a proposal together. We put that proposal to Main Roads and Council for their approval of the sign. We engaged a number of technical experts and referral agencies to prepare reports on safety, lighting and the amenity of the building. Transcore prepared a safety report on the traffic in Canning Highway, and that went to Main Roads, and Main Roads have approved or given us a conditional approval for the sign. The council engineers, I understand, have reviewed that report and have no safety issues. And, you know, all the calculations are in accordance with the Main Road guidelines.
So I think, Councillor Russell, I think you had a question in relation, sorry, where's Councillor Russell? You had a question in relation to the calculation going north-south. So there were a couple of accidents in relation to that, but basically the calculation was in accordance with the Main Roads requirements from that sort of thing. So we've spoken to our traffic engineer about that and followed that through as from one of your questions that you had last week.
Okay, and then council, it went through a period of people were allowed to comment for 30 days. There were a number of people that commented. On the back of that, we ended up doing an independent lighting. We had an independent lighting expert look at all of the houses around. On north, south, east and west, it's all, you've got the Como Hotel on one side, you've got a physio next door. So there's no one directly impacted apart from there were two residences on the other side of the bottle shop, which is about, I don't know, 100 metres away. And the lighting expert felt that they were within the guidelines. And then the only other one was down South Terrace, again on the other side of Como Hotel. Como Hotel, of course, has a car park with lights, and they go quite late. So we've also given council an undertaking that the sign will be turned off at 10 p.m. at night and it'll start up again at 6 o'clock in the morning. So just so that's on the record. So anyway, Main Roads approved the sign, subject to a number of their conditions, which are all acceptable to us. And so we came to South Perth and we thought that we would be, we had followed all the requirements. However, the planners have recommended...
60 seconds remaining, gentlemen.
Sorry, council recommend against. They've applied the regulations because it's on Canning Highway. It would normally not be subject to the regulations that they've pulled us up on, and that is that it's mounted on the roof, which, as you can see, it's not quite mounted on the roof. The amenity, which we thought the amenity was upgraded, and the third party advertising. You know, the council also suggested there's no financial implications. There are clear financial implications if it's not approved. We will follow through to WAPC and SAT. So obviously there's a cost there. Just one thing.
Gentlemen, I am sorry that is 10 minutes and I've got no power to extend that 10 minutes.
Thank you.
But elected members, do you have any questions that you'd like to ask Mr Middlemiss or Mr Kelly? I think Councillor Russell was first there.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, gentlemen, for your deputation, and indeed thank you for correcting those suite of drawings, so it's a lot clearer now. And I think it does reflect the actual size and location of the sign relative to the building. So really my question is a question of reassurance. So based upon those events, have you now gone through and checked that everything is hunky-dory, I guess, and that,
Answer that.
In
Yeah.
terms of the sizing of the sign?
in terms of everything, and,
Yes, we have.
and that there's no surprises?
Yes, we've definitely checked everything, as you would envisage. It was very embarrassing for me and my organisation to present those drawings in the way that they were, so I do apologise for that. So we've double and triple checked everything.
Councillor Quinlan, do you have a question there?
My question was simply, you were kind of cut off just in the middle of a point. Did you wish to finish that?
I think just in relation to the amenity of the sign, one of the key things that we'd like to stress is that 2.5% of the sign is going to be allocated for either community announcements or for public art. And part of the overarching thing as a resident is, you know, we need to be looking at that site, because at the moment it's a pretty dull and dreary sort of site, and the opportunity to upgrade it and to put some public art in there, I think is will be very beneficial to the area. And the other point we'd like to make is that the sign that has been approved down the road is actually, you know, has some history and is larger than the one that we're proposing. We think the one that we're proposing is appropriate for the building. We disagree with council, well, not the council, the officers, in relation to it's not on the roof. It's on the sort of fascia of the second story, so we don't think it's a roof sign. And we also think that there is some precedence in the area for third-party signage. So in relation to that, we think there is some sort of history around that from that sort of things. And as a resident, you know, would like to get your support if we can from that sort of things. So, yeah.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions this evening? No. Thank you both for your deputation, gentlemen.
Thank you.
I'd now like to invite Mr. Robert Keith Mitchell of South Perth. He is speaking on the item, on item 15.1.1. And welcome, Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you, Mayor Milner and councillors. This item in relation to the Birch Street car park, when we saw it on the agenda again, it felt a little bit like having a sore that had started to be healed by the issues that had been debated in August last year, when the council actually resolved to pass a motion by Councillor Brenda Brandis saying that the car park should be kept for community usage. And I'm not sure of the procedure that's gone on since then. And we had done a lot of work in the community. I'm speaking on behalf of several neighbours and a lot of residents that also signed a petition. We felt that the issue had been resolved satisfactorily, and then to have it come up again under a confidential heading, it's almost like scratching the sore and bringing things back to life again. So I just felt that the most important thing was to not let things go by without reminding all of us about the history of that car park and the reasons why it needs to be kept. So the presentation that I've provided to the governance people, I think you've been issued with that. It's only 2 pages, but I'm going to summarise some of it in the interest of time. But on the 17th of August last year, the agenda briefing, there were deputations. That was then item 10.0.1, where the Birch Street car park was shown as an opportunity site. on the plans that were being put forward. They basically appeared just like this, and a small heading, land is an opportunity site. And so when we asked a bit more about it, oh yes, that means that council can start negotiating if this need be for sale if this is approved. So we spoke against it. In my deputation at that stage, I said that there were some direct quotes that I'd like to make sure that you know that these are all found in the council minutes and council items themselves. And first of all, I'll quote from the minutes of the ordinary meeting in 2006 and the details of there, what item it is. Historically, little car parking has been required for this site. The hospital was first approved as a certain bed number hospital with major and minor facilities where no car parking requirements existed. And then in 1958, maternity beds and labour ward were added, and the hospital has added further incrementally over the years to the current size of 65 beds. So that was in 2006. In the town planning scheme number 2 discussion, in the minutes of that 26th of June 2006, none of these town planning schemes operated retrospectively, so car parking was not required to be provided for pre-existing developments, only for new developments approved under the respective schemes. In the report on the amendment number 71 to the town planning scheme, there was a loss of 3 bays, net loss because of an expansion of the hospital. The South Perth Hospital being expanded was always having to bring things before council. And the comment was, council is not concerned about this loss on account of the large council car park adjoining the site. Then in 2006 also, Manager Engineering Infrastructure commented, the only time the Ernest Johnson car park reaches or exceeds capacity is after 5:30 on sports training nights at Ernest Johnson Oval. Hospital staff, patients and visitors are the predominant users of the car park during the day. Increasing the capacity of the car park by 27 to 30 bays would meet the parking needs for all the after 5:30 users, as well as the long-term staff parking needs of the hospital. You can see where this is all going. It's an ongoing usage by the hospital and the community right up to that time. There was also then a contribution that the hospital made towards the cost of redesigning the car park to accommodate the bays, and they made a financial contribution towards that. So there's been an insinuation all the way that the hospital has got rights and has been granted those rights by council. Now, some comments that I feel quite strongly about. The car park is currently used extensively by community members who enjoy the open spaces for a range of things. Upgraded exercise and adventure playground equipment has just been put in exactly where that car park is. If there was going to be a development on that site, we would then find that people would not have ready access with their young children to be able to go on the playground. Dog owners, football and cricket clubs, they use that car park for parking. Removing even part of that car park would significantly diminish local access to the Ernest Johnson Reserve, loss of amenity, and would cause traffic congestion in the surrounding streets. The South Perth Hospital provides an important community health service, and any reduction for the South Perth Hospital to have adequate secure parking would mean that the hospital would need to close or may have to close, and residents would lose local health, medical and diagnostic services. The City of South Perth, as I've quoted before, has over many years recommended and permitted the use of that car park by the hospital in development applications. And the Birch Street car park is a good example of harmoniously meeting different parking needs. The peak times and the days of community needs and hospital needs are complementary to each other. The visual appearance is pleasing. Traffic flows safely between Birch Street and Pilgrim Street, goes in a nice round way. And some of the trees especially are of environmental value as well. The local planning strategy states that the majority of planned future growth and infill is to be accommodated within and around activity centres and along urban corridors. And the zoning that was to be put on it, which was as an opportunity site and zoning as R50, is inconsistent with that strategy. It's been debated on quite a few occasions prior to this last meeting, but we felt that the issue had been put to bed. So on the 23rd of August last year, we got an answer from the government's side of your council in relation to the sale process of Burt Street Car Park. And the question was, and this is in part, there were 4 parts to the question. Would it be mandatory for the land to be advertised publicly? And the answer was yes, it is mandatory for public consultation. I'm sure that would still apply. Anyway, the council meeting resolved other questions, and then they voted, and it was decided to amend the motion to remove opportunity site from the draft local plan scheme number 7, and Councillor Brenda Abrandis's motion to call it a community usage is still somewhere in the system. I don't know where it's actually at this stage. But also the local residents started a petition just in case, and over the next few weeks collect hundreds of signatures. Glenn McIntyre, who is not available here, he's on leave, so I'm really acting on his behalf, but we collected lots and lots of signatures, and I'm quite happy to wave round, and if anyone wants to look at them later, these are just the ones that I've got myself. There are 144 signatures on this page that I've got, let alone what Glenn has got, let alone what the other neighbours have got. There are hundreds of people that said, you know, we want to maintain the car park for community use and for hospital use, not one or the other, but to be synergistic. Anyway, these pages of persons you're willing to, I'm quite happy for people to have those and look at them, and they're all ratepayers as far as I know. If they're not ratepayers, they're certainly, they were asked, only sign it if you are a ratepayer. Now, coming back to the urban infill side of things.
60 seconds, Mr Mitchell.
How much?
60 seconds.
50 seconds. Okay,
60.
The urban infill, I've best said, is done by around corridors of railway lines, bus stations, and this is inappropriate in this residential area where nearly all the houses are on single house per block. And I would like that the council, there are good reasons for obviously to be considered confidential. I don't know those reasons. You do, but I just say that it doesn't come over all that well to be seen to be perhaps a means of minimising the amount of public scrutiny of this issue. But I'm sure the council has got reasons why they've called it confidential, and I'm quite happy to just plead ignorance on that score.
Thank you for your deputation, Mr Mitchell. Councillors, do we have any questions for Mr Mitchell this evening? No. Thank you very much for your deputation.
Thank you.
That brings us to item 10 now, which is the draft August reports. I'll now hand you over to the Chief Executive Officer, Mr Mike Bradford, to take you through the balance of the draft August reports.
Thanks, pardon me. Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.1.1. Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries Club Night Lights Grants Program 2022-23 application and city assessment. The Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries facilitates a Club Night Lights program to provide financial assistance to sporting clubs and local governments to develop sports floodlighting infrastructure. Club Night Lights program applications must be presented to the relevant local government for assessment to provide project ratings and prioritised rankings in the case of multiple applications, and to request in principle support for the proposed projects, including any financial contributions associated with the projects. One application is presented for the current round of the Club Night Lights program for 2022-23, namely the South Perth Lawn Tennis Club, Harden Synthetic Courts Lighting Upgrade Project. The applicant is the South Perth Lawn Tennis Club, who will be responsible for contributing 1/3 of the project cost.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, do we have any questions for the administration on this item tonight? Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just wondering, first of all, when were these costs that are set out on agenda page 9 attained, and what contingency has been included in the price, please?
Mr Quigley, should I send that question in your direction?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We'll have to take that question on notice.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Quedland.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Is this the same project or funding opportunity from the state government that was used to subsidise the lighting works at Hensman Club, tennis club that is, and some of our ovals? Is the first question. And the second question is, perhaps it's somewhere in the reports, is there any anticipated calculation of how much money in running costs and energy saving, i.e. how green the project is, from changing to LEDs from the current sodium vapour and halogen lights that this proposes?
Thank you, Councillor Quedland. I'll send those to Mr Quigley. Mr Quigley, the second question was a bit long. Do you need Councillor Quedland to repeat his first question? You're good? Okay.
So in relation to the first question, the state government facilitates 2 funding programs that local clubs can apply for sporting and recreation infrastructure. So the first one is the Community Sport and Recreation Facility Fund, otherwise known as CSRFF. And the newer program is called the Club Night Lights program, where applicants can apply specifically for funding for sports lighting. The report in the agenda today is relating to the Club Night Lights program, which is the same funding program that funded the previous project for the Hensman Tennis Club. In relation to the second question, I'm not sure. I might look to my colleague, Mr Atwell, if he has any advice about LED lights, but we might have to take that one on notice.
Thank you. Mr Atwell?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So I think probably safer to take it on notice, but in saying so, we can assume that there would be energy savings with the LED lighting, but as far as the extent of the benefit, it's probably better to look at that from a technical perspective.
Thank you. Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This may need to be taken on notice as well because it's kind of following on from my earlier question. Just wondering what the standard contingency for these type of projects are at this point in time, taking into account the higher than usual inflation?
Mr Quigley?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Thank you, through the Chair, Mr Quigley. I'm just wondering, following on from my earlier questions about contingency, whether anything has been applied to this project in terms of escalation. The follow-up question was, is contingency normally applied to these type of projects? And if so, is it the same now as what it was, has always been applied, taking into account the levels of inflation that we're currently experiencing?
Mr Quigley. Oh, Mr Atwell?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think it would be reasonable to suggest that when providing or when considering escalation for any project, then the current economic situation would be taken into account. So currently, with inflation running as it is and building costs as they are being reported, escalation at probably at least 15%, I would have thought, depending on the timing as to when the original estimates were done. But perhaps we can provide that more formally in our reply on notice.
Thank you. Councillor Choi?
Thank you, through the chair, Mr. Quigley and Ms. Atwell. That was exactly what I was looking for. Just wondering, next to on page 9 again of the agenda, next to the CSRFF grant sought, there's a little star or asterisk. Was trying to work out where's that reference to. Obviously, that's a reference to somewhere, but I couldn't find it in the actual report. I just wanted to know if there was a reason why that asterisk was there. That was all.
Mr. Quigley, can I send that one your way?
So the asterisk refers to additional funding that the state government may provide for some projects, whereby if the projects show reductions in costs through efficiency gains, applicants can apply for funding over and above the 1/3. So it's not guaranteed, but it's something that will be assessed by the department once the application is submitted. So that's why the asterisk is in the report.
Thank you, Mr. Quigley. Councillor Choi?
Thank you through the chair, Mr. Quigley. And my final question in relation to all of that is, if there is a cost escalation of up to 15%, who pays for the increase, please? Is it purely out of municipal funds, or is it like a mix of like the state government, the club? You know, will it remain in like equal shares overall, or who pays more?
Mr. Quigley?
If there are any cost escalations, the burden will be on the applicant. So in this case, it'll be the club.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions on this item? Councillor Manolis?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a small question. If the CSRFF grant isn't obtained, will this project still go ahead?
Mr. Quigley?
No, because in this case, we're recommending that the project would only proceed if the external grant was obtained through the CSRFF program. I beg your pardon. If the external grant is applied through the Club Lights program, so if it's unsuccessful, then the application won't proceed.
Thank you. Any further questions on this item, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr. Bradford.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Item 10.1.2, Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries, Community Sport and Recreation Facilities Fund, CSRFF, Small Grants Program for 2022-23, application and city assessment. Each year, the Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries calls for applications via its CSRFF, Small Grants Program, to invite eligible sporting clubs and local governments to apply for funding to assist with sport and recreation infrastructure projects. CSRFF applications must initially be presented to the relevant local government for its assessment, to provide project ratings and prioritised rankings, and to request in-principle support for the proposed projects, including the financial contribution requested by the application under the CSRFF program. One application is presented for the current round of CSRFF small grants, namely the South Perth Lawn Tennis Club Court resurfacing project. The applicant is the South Perth Lawn Tennis Club, who will be responsible for contributing 1/3 of the project cost.
Thank you, Mr. Bradford. Councillors, any questions on this item? Councillor Choi?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I've just got the same questions as I had for the previous item. So those ones that were taken on notice in relation to contingency and cost escalation, they can be taken on notice again for this item as well, please.
Mr. Quigley, Mr. Atwell, is that okay with you?
Yes, noted. Thank you.
All right. Councillors, any further questions on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr. Bradford.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Item 10.3.1, proposed third-party digital advertising sign additions to existing commercial building on lot 303, number 149 to 153, South Terrace, Como. This report seeks Council's consideration for recommendation of refusal to the West Australian Planning Commission for third-party digital advertising sign additions to an existing commercial building, lot 303, number 149 to 153 South Terrace, Como. The item is referred to council as there is no specific delegation afforded to officers to determine the application. It is considered that the proposed development does not achieve compliance with the requirements and objectives of the relevant planning scheme and policy and would have a significantly adverse amenity impact on the residents of the precinct. For the reasons outlined in the report, it is recommended that council advise the WAPC of a recommendation of refusal for the reasons listed in the report.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. With regard to the deputation tonight, we heard that they considered the roof-mounted advertising as being compliant and not contrary to clause 6.12 subparagraph 3. Could I just get clarity on that as to whether, having heard the deputation tonight, whether that's actually fair and correct or whether it's still non-compliant with regard to roof-mounted advertising?
Ms Mellon.
Thank you, through the chair. The officer's opinion is that this is still classified as a roof-mounted sign because, as you can see from the additional information that has been provided, there is a small part of the sign that now forms part of the fascia, but the majority of the sign is actually roof-mounted. So it is still considered to be a roof-mounted sign for that purpose. Thank you.
Any further questions on this item, councillors? I think Councillor Choi was first by a smidge there. Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I had a series of questions that I prepared at the last month's meeting before this matter was adjourned to this month. So, and I believe the officer, Ms Lummer, has already prepared responses, but she's absent today. So, just wondering if someone's able to respond, because I did put these on notice, that was all, last month.
Ms Mullen, dear.
Thank you, through the chair. I do have 10 questions that were previously tabled by Councillor Choi and answers to them.
Okay.
Are you seeking answers to those questions here, Councillor Choi?
Yes, please. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Ms Mullen?
Thank you, through the chair. Would you require Councillor Choi to read the questions?
We can do that, yes. Councillor Choi, did you want to read them perhaps one by one? Otherwise, 10 questions and then 10 answers might be a bit hard to follow. So maybe we'll do one question, one answer.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Question number one, what material differences exist in both planning and policy between this proposed third-party digital advertising sign for the corner of South Terrace and Canning Highway and the already approved and functioning third-party digital advertising signs located on the corner of Henley Street and Canning Highway?
Thank you. The application site at the corner of Canning Highway and Henley Street is located within the Canning Bridge Activity Centre plan area. This is the only difference between the application sites in relation to the applicable planning framework.
Thank you, through the chair, Ms Mullen. Question number two, I understand the proposed third-party digital advertising sign contains one screen, whereby the third-party digital advertising sign on the corner of Henley Street and Canning Highway contains two screens, both of which are larger in scale than the currently proposed third-party digital advertising sign, as set out in the officer's report on page 8. But what are the display area differences between the three signs, please?
Thank you, through the chair. The sign at the corner of Canning Highway and Henley is 41 square metres. The Canning Highway westbound sign is 25.98 square metres. The current application sign is 25.8 square metres.
Thank you, through the chair, Ms Mullen. Question number three, what does the city gain out of the third-party digital advertising signs located on the corner of Henley Street and Canning Highway? And what does the city stand to lose if the officer recommendation to refuse the application for this currently proposed third-party digital advertising sign is supported by council?
Thank you, through the chair. This is not a relevant or material consideration in relation to the termination of this development application. Thank you.
Thank you, through the chair, Ms Mullen. Question number four, I understand from the applicant's planning reports, and specifically page 15 of attachment C, that the subject site has historically displayed quite a large rooftop advertising sign, and other than the currently proposed sign being digital and lower on the rooftop than the previous static higher up sign, what is the difference, please?
Thank you, through the chair. As referenced in the officer's report, the current proposal is contrary to the provisions of TPS 6 and policy P308, both of which post-date the rooftop signage indicated within the applicant's planning report.
Thank you through the chair, Ms Mellon. And just following up from that, part B to that one, so there's no grandfather type clause?
Through the chair, thank you, that's correct.
Thank you through the chair, Ms Mellon. Question number 5. What is the difference in brightness between the Como Hotel neon sign situated on the opposite corner of the South Terrace and Canning Highway intersection and the proposed third-party digital advertising sign? And is that neon sign left on overnight or turned off at closing?
Thank you, through the chair. The pylon sign located at the Como Hotel is illuminated via LED tubes. The city has no information for the Como Hotel sign in regard to brightness. However, a condition of approval states that the illumination of the sign must not exceed 300 CD to metre squared, which is candela per square metre, between sunset and sunrise. There are no restrictions in relation to hours of operation. The exact luminance levels in relation to the current application have not been submitted. However, within the road safety assessment, it states, this is a quote, the proposed LED advertising sign panel will have the ability to display advertising content at variable luminance levels. The luminance of the display will be programmed to operate at different levels required for different times of the day and night, as specified in the Main Roads WA guidelines. The luminance level should not exceed those of static signs in typical ambient light conditions in accordance with Main Roads WA guidelines. Policy and application, end of quote. Policy and application guidelines for advertising signs within and beyond State Road Reserve states for daytime it's 6,000 CD to the metre squared, dawn and dusk is 600 CD to metre squared, and night is 300 CD to metre squared. Thank you.
Thank you through the chair, Ms Mellon. Question number 6. What are the intersection crash statistics for the intersection of South Terrace and Canning Highway, where the third-party digital's advertising sign is proposed, and how does this compare to the crash statistics for the intersection at Henley Street and Canning Highway, where a third-party digital advertising sign is already located?
Thank you, through the chair. As Main Roads WA and the city's asset and design team raised no objection to the proposal, this information is not relevant to the consideration of the application. Thank you.
Thank you through the chair, Ms Mellon. Question number 7. I understand in the officer's report on page 16 that neighbour consultation was undertaken with a total of 334 consultation notices sent out and 12 submissions received, 4 in favour and 8 against the proposed third-party digital advertising sign application. What significance and weight are attributed to these numbers, and how does this compare with other neighbour consultations and officer recommendations relating to other development applications?
Thank you, through the chair. There is no significance or weight attached to the number of submissions received in relation to a particular development application. Rather, officers assess the material planning considerations contained within those submissions, whether these are supporting or objecting to a proposal. Each application is considered on its merits, not in comparison to others. Thank you.
Thank you through the chair, Ms Mellon. Question number 8. I understand from the applicant's planning report, specifically page 25 of attachment C, that the city supported the third-party digital advertising sign on the corner of Henley Street and Canning Highway, as subsequently approved by the Metro Central JDAP in November 2019. Is that correct?
Thank you, through the chair. Officers recommended refusal of the initial application in July 2019, with the Metro Central JDAP subsequently refusing the application. Pursuant to Section 31 of the State Administrative Tribunal Act 2004, the application was reconsidered by the Metro Central JDAP and approved on 7th of November 2019. At that time, officers recommended approval.
Thank you through the chair, Ms Mellon. Question number 9. If the officer recommendation to refuse the application for the proposed third-party digital advertising sign is supported by council and the application is referred to the WAPC for determination, can the city foresee the likely outcome and possible implications?
Thank you, through the chair. Main Roads have raised no objection to the proposal, so it is possible that the application will be approved by the WAPC. The WAPC will likely seek draft conditions from the city before approval.
Thank you through the chair. My last question, Ms Mellon. Councillor Cridland referred to the city's sign policy at the agenda briefing last month, and I'm just wondering if that policy has been updated since the third-party digital advertising sign was approved for the corner of Henley Street and Canning Highway. If not, does it perhaps need to be, and as soon as practicable, to contemplate more of these digital sign-type applications coming into the city?
Thank you, through the chair. Policy P308 was last updated in March 2016. The city is currently in the process of reviewing the policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a follow-up question to Councillor Saladin. So I can see that the sign is actually cantilevered off the roof structure via a steel bracing. So it's actually off the roof structure itself. So does that add weight to the argument that the sign is actually roof mounted?
Just before I send that one to Ms Mullen, did you mean the question raised by Councillor Brenda Abrandis, Councillor Russell? I'm not sure that was raised by Councillor... good. Just wanted to make sure I was on the right track. Ms Mullen?
Thank you to the Chair. I think that's correct, yes. The predominant structure supporting the sign is actually placed on the roof, and therefore we would consider that to be a roof structure. Thank you.
Any further questions on this item, councillors? Councillor Saladin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that the CEO said in his initial preamble something about significant adverse impact to amenity of the residents in the area. Can I just get a little bit more clarity around what significant adverse impacts there are?
Ms Mullen?
Thank you, through the Chair. Officers consider that the amenity of the area in terms of the size of the sign and the illumination will impact the amenity for local residents, and that's the justification for the significant impact on residents.
Councillor Saladin.
So just that they see it when they drive past it?
Thank you, through the Chair. Well, I think what would result from this sign would be a discordant feature within the street scene. So yes, you could say distill it down to they will be able to see the sign. Amenity takes a number of forms, and a visual amenity is quite a significant, has quite a significant impact on residents as they go about their daily business. It's acknowledged that there aren't any direct residents directly adjacent to the site, but in the locale, it's considered there will still be a significant amenity issue to those residents.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. Councillors, any further? Councillor Choi?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just following on from Councillor Saladin's question, did that significant impact assessment take into account the turning off of the sign overnight, or was that determined before that time?
Ms Mullen.
Thank you, through the Chair. Yes, that was considered as well. Thank
you. Councillor Russell.
Probably not a planning matter, but is the licence holder, is that WAPC, or would that be the city? Who provides the licence to operate the advertisement?
Ms Mullen.
Thank you, through the Chair. I think Councillor Russell's correct. It's not actually a planning question, and I'm not actually aware of the answer. Thank you.
Any further questions on this item, councillors? No. And just a reminder that particularly where elected members do have a significant number of questions, there's also the ability to contact the city officers offline. With that, next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.3.2, Tender 03 of 2022, Provision of Consultancy for Electrical Services. This report considers submissions received from the advertising of Tender 3 of 2022 for provision of consultancy electrical services. The report outlines the assessment process used for the evaluation of tenders received and recommends approval of the tender that provides the best value for money and level of service to the city.
Councillor De Souza, straight off the bat there.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is more from my own understanding. So obviously an electrical consultancy service is different from the operational wirings and drawings. Is that, so am I correct in understanding this contract will be for high-level strategic advice to the city for electrical works at maybe sporting clubs and things like that?
Mr Atwell?
Thank you for the question. Through the Chair, so the consultancy would be available to provide advice to the city in relation to strategic issues like potentially changing path lighting systems from the current incandescent lights to LED lights, for example, to provide advice about negotiating with Western Power about changing the Western Power lighting system to LED, but also to provide advice in relation to specific design projects like the ones we've referred to earlier with Mr Quigley, in that the actual design could be provided by that consultancy service.
Thank you, Mr Atwell. Councillor De Souza?
Just one more question, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Mr Atwell. And could those services be used to, I guess, assist clubs in putting forward grants to the CSIRO programs and similar programs?
Mr Atwell.
Thank you, through the Chair. So typically in liaising with the clubs in relation to these projects. Initial conceptual design would be undertaken to provide the cost estimates, for example, that the grants are based on. So yes, the consultant would be available to provide that support.
Any further questions on this item, councillors? Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, but behind closed doors.
Yes, no, we can do that. Any other questions that can be asked in open chambers, remembering that there is a confidential attachment? Councillor Joy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just referring to page 33 of the agenda, under financial implications, just wondering where it says the total cost of the works is included in the 22-23 budget, and I'm just wondering where has that been placed in the budget, like somewhere in the operational, or is there a particular line item, like where does it exist?
Who should I direct that one to? Mr Atwell?
Through the chair, so typically design costs are part of the capital works program. So if there was a new park development, for example, that had a lighting component, then the consulting cost to provide the lighting design would be part of that capital expenditure.
Councillor Joy.
Thank you. Through the chair, Mr Atwell. So that means it could be dispersed throughout the capital works program, is that correct?
Mr Bradford.
Yeah, that's correct. And the nature of this contract is a schedule of rates, so it's effectively a standing offer that we would call on to provide services within specific projects.
Any further questions on this item, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.3.3, RFT 5 of 2022, provision of verge side collection service. This report considers submissions received from the advertising of Tender 5 of 2022 for the provision of verge side collection service. The report outlines the assessment process used for the evaluation of tenders and recommends approval of the tender that provides the best value for money and service for the city. There's also a confidential attachment for this item.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Any councillors, any questions on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.1, listing of payments, July 2022. This report presents to the Council a list of accounts paid under delegated authority between 1 and 31 July for information.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions on this item? Councillor Joy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I know on page 127 of the attachments in the listing of payments that there is another payment entry for the Coode Street Foreshore Node works to Element for around $9,000, and can't pronounce the name, but I'll try, Juna, for around $7,000. And I was just wondering what these works were for, please, and how much funds has been spent all up on these works to date for this node.
Mr Adams, should I send that your way?
So Element were engaged to assist with the community engagement regarding the Coode Street project. With regard to the total amount paid for that so far, I'd have to take that one on notice.
Councillor Joy.
Thank you through the chair, Mr Adams. And the other payment to Juna for around $7,000 for the same.
I'll have to take that one on notice.
Councillors, any further questions on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Item 10.4.2, monthly financial statements for July 2022. The monthly financial statements are provided within attachments A through I, and a high level analysis is contained in the comments of the report.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions on this item? Councillor Joy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I note in the 2022-23 capital revenue and expenditure budget versus actual spreadsheet on page 144 of the attachments that the South Perth Foreshore Coode Street bike crossing lights has been added in as a new standalone item of $60,000. But I believe it is actually part of that new bike path crossing overall works that wasn't for some reason previously foreseen and included in the original or amended budget endorsed by Council. Is that correct? And what is also the overall total cost now of that new bike crossing between Coode Street and Douglas Avenue, South Perth?
Mr Lecoq, should I send that your way? Or to Mr Adams? Or Mr Atwell?
Thank you through the chair. I'd have to take that question on notice, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Joy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I note on page 42 of the agenda that the city's investments in non-fossil fuel institutions has increased quite considerably to almost 50%. And if that's the case, then that can only be a positive, right, for the city, albeit I know we have no targets in place for this, do we?
Mr Adams or Mr Lecoq?
That is correct. Through the chair, we do not have any specific targets, and investments are done in accordance with the policy, adopted policy, which stipulates that non-fossil fuel investments will be considered subject to other security arrangements that those investment companies offer, and that investments are still in compliance with policy requirements.
Thank you, Mr Lecoq. Any other questions on this item, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.3, Model Standards for CEO Recruitment, Performance and Termination. The report presents the City of South Perth Model Standards for CEO Recruitment, Performance and Termination for adoption. The model standards are a requirement under the Local Government Act 1995.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm just wondering when did the statutory requirement come into effect?
Mr Adams, should I send that your way?
I'll have to take that on notice with regard to the exact date.
Any further questions? Councillor Choi.
And also just wanted to clarify or confirm that there is no variation or alteration to the regulated model standards.
Mr Adams?
No, we're proposing that we adopt the model standards without variation.
Thank you. Any further questions on this item, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.4, Council Delegation DC 702, granting a fee waiver for Collier Park Golf Course. This report proposes a new delegation to the CEO to vary the schedule of fees and charges for the Collier Park Golf Course and mini golf to undertake promotional offers, charity events and other concessional rates.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions on this item? Councillor Brenda Abrandis, I think, was first there.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just with regard to this recommendation, have we had previous propositions with regard to the mini golf for events and functions that we have given consideration to this recommendation?
Mr Adams, should I send that in your direction?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understood the question.
Yeah, so with regard to this motion coming forward, there's obviously been propositions to use mini golf for events and functions. Is that fair to say, or is that the reason why the motion is for us tonight? Or?
So there's already a number of fees and charges adopted with regard to golf and mini golf. However, obviously there's different promotional opportunities and different times of the day when capacity, or times of the week when capacity is not fully reached. Therefore, having the ability to be more flexible gives the operator a chance to take advantage of some of those times when the golf course and the mini golf is not at capacity. So, for instance, on a weekday afternoon when there's inclement weather, they may be able to do something through social media where it's like a flash sale on social media to say, you know, get down to the golf course within the next few hours and you can play for half price or something like that, which is just taking advantage of those particular opportunities, which they can't currently do at the moment because they don't have authority to vary those rates. Also, when they want to do promotional opportunities in a planned way, this also gives us the opportunity to, do 2-for-1 offers and things like that. So this is really about trying to run the golf course in a more business-like manner and taking advantage of some of those quiet times and getting more people through.
Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you very much for that explanation and the underutilisation being taken advantage of. Just with regard to community groups, have we been considering any other community groups or maybe universities or schools that we could be networking with in order to bolster the revenue from mini golf?
Mr. Adams?
Yes, so the operator is currently and always tries to take advantage of some of those opportunities, particularly given their proximity to Curtin University and encouraging students to play there. There is currently at least one school that has a regular weekday booking for, I think it's 25 students, and so they're hoping to grow that as well.
Any further questions on this item? Councillor Saladin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is not just for the mini golf, that right, for the whole facility. I'm just going to be devil's advocate here, but the way I read the delegation is to vary the schedule of fees and charges. So they could also go up.
Mr. Adams?
So, well, the intent of it is to undertake promotional offers. So I'm not sure how we would undertake promotional offers, city charity events and concessional rates by putting the price up. So I think that'll be counterintuitive.
Well, I understand that, but that for me, it's not explicit. There are also already groups that, use the facility. There's a lot of clubs, they don't pay any leases or anything, to the city, but they still operate out of Collier Park. Is that going to apply to them as well, or?
Mr. Adams?
So there's already a number of different rates in the fees and charges that cover particular groups and particular concessional rates, etc. This is designed so that this delegation is so that, as I said, the operator can be more flexible and take advantage of times when there is lower usage of the golf course. So a lot of those groups are already covered by the rates that are in the schedule of fees and charges. This is to take it a step further to be able to allow some of those promotional opportunities and things like what I previously described to take place.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What kind of visibility we're going to have on these events and charges and changes as a council?
Mr. Adams?
So this isn't about making permanent changes to the schedule of fees and charges. This is about the ability to vary them for particular purposes that are prescribed in the delegation. So I'm not sure that council would want to be kept across every time the fees are varied on a particular day or a particular moment of the day. What you do get, though, is financial reporting on how the golf course is going in terms of the golf, the mini golf, and all aspects of that. I think that's the financial oversight that you get. So I wouldn't envisage any further reporting on this other than the fact that the CEO does need to record when a particular delegation is used, and so that would be recorded in a record of when things had been, when this delegation had been used.
I might ask a question myself at this stage. There are other local governments that have golf courses. Mr. Adams, maybe this is to you. What do other local governments do who have golf courses and might be facing times where there's peak times and non-peak times?
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Mayor. Cambridge, for example, which has probably the most successful of the golf courses run by local governments in Wembley, has at the bottom of the fees and charges a statement that the CEO be delegated by absolute majority to award the schedule to amend the schedule for Wembley Golf Course to undertake promotional offers, charity events and other concessional rates. So pretty much is what we've got here, in accordance with section 612 of the Local Government Act. The City of Canning, which has Whaleback Golf Course, has a delegation to the CEO, which is broader, and it's a delegation to grant discounts and concessions under 612, and it's in relation to all fees, levies and charges. And the City of Stirling has a similar delegation, which is the delegation to waive or grant concessions except for rates and service charges. So we're not going as broad as that. This is only for fees and charges to do with the Collier Park Golf Course.
Thank you. Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And just following on from your question, I've seen the same, I think, in the City of Melville, fees and charges, where they've, under different areas, they've given the CEO some overriding discretion to discount or up to a certain budget, as decided by council. So I'm just wondering then, do we have to amend the fees and charges schedule? So would that have to be put out for public comment and be endorsed by council, that kind of thing, like following, I think, the required legislative processes? And then we would include that sort of terminology or statement in amongst the fees and charges, like similarly to what I've just said and what Mr Adams has just said as well.
Mr Adams.
No, this is a delegation that would be applied by the CEO in terms of only those fees and charges relating to the golf course. So there's no need to amend the schedule of fees and charges. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do it by way of delegation. Otherwise you could end up with 100 different fees and charges relating to the golf course, which is confusing for everybody. So it's better that we look at how we take advantage of some market opportunities as they arise, and that we try and make the golf course as financially viable as possible by taking advantage of opportunities like this.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Mr Bradford?
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. This came about, we had a strategic meeting with the golf course operator recently, so after the budget, and they specifically raised that the specific example they use is that when the weather is really good and not too hot but pleasantly warm, the golf course pretty well, like the driving range and the golf course operates pretty well at capacity. But if there is a period where, in a couple of days' time, it looks like there's going to be rain, they can be pretty sure, for example, the driving range isn't going to be at full capacity. So, like doing a flash sale or saying, half price on a bucket of balls and things like that. At the moment, they don't have that flexibility, and so we don't actually maximise the revenue opportunity through the golf course.
Councillor D'Souza.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Mr Bradford, for that clarity. So I guess my question is there a reporting mechanism that can be put in place so council can ascertain that what this scheme plans to do is what it actually does? So like council can see, okay, over the 3-month cycle, every time there's been a rainy day, there's been a half price sale, and whether that actually filters through to increasing the usage rates.
Thank you. Mr Bradford?
Thanks for the question. My suggestion would be that council operating at the strategic level would be monitoring the overall financial performance of the golf course, and so we should be seeking to improve the financial performance of the golf course, and that's where I think council's focus should be, on the reports that you get in terms of the revenue and cost of, on that sort of frequency. Diving down into other details, very operational. I don't think that's a strategic role.
Councillor Russell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Is the CEO stating that the city's full of fair weather golfers?
Mr Bradford?
I'm certainly a fair weather golfer.
Any further questions on this item, councillors? Councillor Choi.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. So just following on from Mr Bradford's comments regards and Mr Adams' comments regards the delegation. So if the city has a delegation and the council endorses, and it makes complete sense to me, everything that's been discussed here this evening so far on it, so I'm not questioning that, but I'm just in terms of the process. So there's no legislative requirement then to have that anything included in the adopted fees and schedule for discretion to be applied. They can all exist in the delegation without amending anything in the fees and charges schedule, because that was part of the adopted annual budget. That's all. I'm just making sure about that.
Mr Adams?
Yes, that's correct. So the delegation would give the CEO the power to waive to grant concessions or waive or grant concessions on only those fees that relate to the Collier Park Golf Course, which is included in the schedule of fees. It doesn't require anything else other than the delegation and the CEO exercising that delegation as he would with any other delegation that's given to him.
Thank you. Councillors, any final questions on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.5, Town Planning Scheme Amendment number 61, correspondence from the Honourable Minister for Transport, Planning and Ports. This report is to notify Council of the correspondence received from the Honourable Minister for Transport, Planning and Ports.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The Minister's letter makes reference to the City's South Perth Peninsula Place and Design Report and the Central Sub-Regional Planning Framework, which I believe is the Peel Perth 3.5 million. I'm assuming that these documents were starting points for the City when forming the initial South Perth Activity Centre Plan and the Amendment 61. Am I correct in my assumption there?
Ms Mellon, can I send that in your direction?
I would probably have to take that on notice. It predates my time at the City and it's the strategic planning element rather than statutory. So I'll take that on notice. Thank you.
Any other questions? I think Councillor Crittenden was first there.
I've read the letter back from the Minister. Was anyone able to actually gain any understanding from her letter back to us that assisted us?
Ms Mellon, would you need to take that one on notice?
Through the Chair, I think that would be for Ms Lummer to respond to. So yes, we will take that on notice. Thank you.
Councillor Choi?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm just wondering, because I don't recall seeing the Central Sub-Regional Planning Framework of March 2018 and the City of South Perth's Peninsula Place and Design Report of May 2017. Is that something that councillors can have access to?
Mr Bradford?
Suspect they're public documents.
Okay, thank you. I probably have, but I just don't recall right now reading this letter. My second question, thank you, Mr. Through the Chair, Mr. Bradford. I'm just wondering the submissions that the Honourable Minister is referring to, were they sent to her? You know, the public submissions that's included here, the community received by the City during public advertising. Were there certain submissions that were sent to the Minister? I'm just trying to work out what she's referring to then and how she received those.
Who should I direct that to in Director Lummer's absence? Ms Mellon?
Thank you, through the Chair. My understanding is that submissions would have been summarised and sent as part and parcel of the documents that were sent to the Department for consideration.
Thank you. Any further questions on this item, councillors? Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So the letter talks about finalise or collection of community benefit. I just have a question for the administration and can be taken on notice. Do we have any clarity around how these funds are going to be spent? Has that been finalised?
Ms Mellon?
Thank you. Through the Chair, that would be taken on notice. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions on this item, councillors? No. I would say next item, Mr Bradford at this point, but this next item is 10.5.1. Councillors, does anyone have any questions on this item? Because if you do, I'll temporarily leave the chamber. Councillor Choi does. In that case, I'll leave the chamber. Councillor D'Souza, if you can take my place as presiding member. And if someone would be kind enough to grab me once this item is done.
All right, the Mayor has left the chamber. Item 10.5.1, proposed licence agreement for Manning Community Toy Library, Inc., located at the Manning Community Centre. Does anyone have any questions on this item? Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Member. Just curious as to why Council endorsed a lease agreement for the South Perth Toy Library at the end of last year on exactly the same terms and almost identical officer recommendation and report. But we're looking at a licence agreement for the Manning Toy Library.
I did provide a reply to your email this afternoon.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just receiving that now, I think.
As you know, a lease is typically provided when there's exclusive use of a facility for someone, and a licence is when there's non-exclusive use. South Perth Toy Library has exclusive use of the facility that they use. The Manning Toy Library does not.
Thank you, Mr. Bradford. Members, any further questions on this item? None. In that case, we will re-invite the Mayor back into the meeting.
Thank you for waiting, councillors, and I assume that we're up to item 10.5.2. Mr. Bradford.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Item 10.5.2, proposed lease agreement for Mordich Keeler Incorporated, located at Manning Community Centre. This report seeks a council approval for the city to enter into a new lease agreement with Mordich Keeler for its continued use of a portion of the Manning Community Centre, located at lot 803 on Plan 69206 for a 5-year term with an option of renewal for a further 5-year term.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr. Bradford.
Item 10.5.3, proposed lease agreement for Manning Rippers Football Club incorporated at 1 Bradshaw Crescent, Manning. This report seeks council approval for the City of South Perth to enter into a lease agreement with Manning Rippers Football Club for its continued use of part of Crown Reserve R51462 on deposited Plan 72861, Lot 501, 1 Bradshaw Crescent, Manning, for sport and recreation purposes for a 5-year term with a 5-year renewal option.
Thank you, Mr. Bradford. Councillors, any questions on this item? No. That brings us to the end of item 10. Item 12 is motions of which previous notice has been given, of which there's nil this evening. That brings us to item 15, which is, unfortunately for those in the gallery, is when we have to close the meeting to the public. So at this point, I'd like to say thank you for all the attendees who have been with us this evening. Hope you have a lovely evening, and I'm sure we'll see you all again soon. the look of the thing, reopened the doors there. But I declare this meeting closed at 7:59 p.m. Thank you all for your attendance this evening, and good night.